Part of the bicentenary is a history festival, which will be held in the last weekend of January next year. And we're inviting everybody to make a contribution to the history festival. You can either be in a historical paper to deliver at a conference, or it can be materials which are starting to grow on the board over there, something that you'd like to share with other people. It can be an art display, it can be a family history, it can be a timeline, it can be a history of your house, your street, your family, Noel's family, which will be a lot of photographs. In order to get you to that point at the beginning of next year, we thought it would be incumbent upon us to give you somewhere withal to be able to research Richmond history. Now, most of that has been completed already in the first two sessions of the Richmond Talks. The closing for expressions of interest in putting in a submission is the 6th of September, which is 2 months, roughly 2 months away. So that's why we're having a meeting, so people can share information and pass on information which you otherwise wouldn't normally come across. Tonight's Richmond Talks comes in 3 parts. We open for the first 10 minutes or so with an overview of one of the events for the bicentenary, and tonight we're going to look at the third weekend, which goes from 9 to 12 February 2024, which is a Convict Muster, and the coordinator of that is Dr. Dianne Snowden, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Now, Dianne will then take on another task tonight, which is talking about the issue of oral history, which is a fairly sort of ethereal thing to most of us, but Dianne's done an awful lot of work in this area, which is why she's come here tonight to do 2 things, to talk about the Convict Muster and to talk about the use of oral history. Now, Dianne has a very long and very impressive CV, and I'm only going to make the point that apart from being an historian and a genealogist, she knows Richmond very well. She lived here for many years, and she's writing history of Richmond, and she's also mixed up actively in female convict research and the use of family history and academic resources. So I'd like to invite Dianne. Dianne's got 2 talks to give, and she's going to have a very short break in between, and she'll signal that to us. And then when that happens, 2 minutes, stand up and turn around, and then we'll go into the second part of Dianne's talk, and then there'll be a 5-minute break for everybody to get up and mingle. And then we'll listen to Byron Bailey, who'll do the last part of the meeting. So could I introduce Dr. Dianne Snowden? Dianne? You right there?
Hope so. Thank you, Alan, for your warm welcome, and thank you to everyone who's here, who has come out on this really cold night. I'm only here because I'm scared of Noel, and I didn't dare not come. So thank you all very much for coming. I've been asked a couple of times why a convict muster, and I'm going to take some time to answer that question. But before I start, how many of you here are descended from a convict? How many of you are descended from a convict who served his or her time at Richmond? And how many of you are descended from a convict who settled in Richmond after serving time? People are looking at me as if to say, me? So that's good. It gives me an indication of who you are. So, I'm going to start by talking about what is a muster. I don't know how, Bob, is that easy enough to read? Don't worry about it, you don't need to. So a muster counted specific sections of the population, and historically it was used to control and inspect members of the Army or Navy. Official lists known as muster rolls or registers were created from the information obtained at a muster. In colonial Van Diemen's Land, musters were used to keep track of the population. Notice of a muster was usually advertised in the Hobart Town Gazette or a local newspaper. The advertisement specified which sections of the population were required to present at the muster and when and where they had to assemble. A muster could involve surveying a specific cohort, such as convicts, or the whole of the inhabitants in the colony, including convicts, ex-convicts, also known as emancipists, and free settlers, in a general muster. Convicts who were free by servitude were expected to display their free certificate at the muster. Musters were generally conducted under the order of the Lieutenant Governor, an officer of the Commissariat or the police magistrate. So this slide shows the advertisement for a ticket of leave muster at Richmond in July 1841. A ticket of leave was an indulgence or privilege which allowed convicts to work for themselves on condition they remained in a specified area, reported regularly to local authorities, and attended divine worship every Sunday. So why have a convict muster as part of Richmond's bicentenary? There are three reasons, I think, for holding a gathering or convict muster as part of the bicentenary celebrations in 2024. Firstly, to understand how the convict system shaped Richmond. Secondly, to enable Richmond convict descendants to obtain and share information about their convict ancestor or ancestors. And three, to connect those who share Richmond convict ancestry, especially those who are descended from the same convict or convict family. So really like a glorified convict family reunion. When Lieutenant Governor Arthur arrived in Van Diemen's Land in 1824, he set about strengthening the key elements of the penal colony. He established a number of police districts. In 1825, Richmond was an integral part of Lieutenant Governor Arthur's system of police districts, with a jail, courthouse, barracks and watch house. I know it's a bit hard to see. It's a beautiful map, but hard to read. And Richmond is outlined in yellow. I don't know if, Jenny, can you see the yellow bit? Yeah. It was huge. Yeah, it was really, really huge. So the Richmond Police District, you can see the extent of this from Jeff Lennox's map. So if someone says that they had a convict who was in Richmond, they could be right up near Alford or across to Brighton. People used to knock on my door and say, I had a convict who lived in Richmond, which house did he live in? And it would turn out that they were up at Jerusalem or Colebrook when you actually looked at the detail. So around this penal infrastructure, businesses were established: inns, blacksmiths, saddlers, stockyards, tanneries, a marketplace, brick and lime kilns, a windmill, and general stores. In 1835, Richmond was the third largest district in Tasmania. Richmond's heritage is significant because of the surviving elements of the convict system. This map shows some of the key elements, but not all, of convict Richmond. So you've got the Richmond Bridge as number one, which was built by convicts, the Richmond Courthouse and the Richmond Jail. Richmond Police District centred on the township of Richmond. It was approximately 1,050 square miles or 2,719 square kilometres. It was bounded on the south and west by Storm Bay, the River Derwent and the Jordan as far as Blackbrush in the Broadmarsh district, where it was separated from the Oatlands district by a line drawn through Jerusalem, across the Coal River, through Prosser's Plains and along the Prosser River to the sea. The police district had a salaried police magistrate who controlled a chief district constable. Ex-convicts were often constables and field police. Is there anyone here who had a convict who was a constable? Or that little man down the back's got his hand up again? Okay. So just one example, former convict Benjamin Jacobs for example, was a constable and member of the field police in Richmond. A 42-year-old baker, Jacobs was tried in Surrey, England, and was transported for life for housebreaking. He arrived on the Thames in 1829. In 1831, he was able to bring his wife Sarah and 2 children to Van Diemen's Land. More children were born in the colony. In his early years in Richmond, he lived in what is now Seggs, although I still think of it as Marfusi's, in Bridge Street. He later moved to Bathurst Street. By the end of his life, he had a 100-acre property on Risdon Road in Hobart. Other officials in the district included a salaried surgeon and police clerk. There was also a detachment of soldiers and a flagellator. Does anyone not know what a flagellator is? Why are you laughing? It's a terrible job. The police magistrates exercised the functions of justices, coroners and commissioners of the Court of Requests. They granted travel passes to convicts and forwarded convict applications for indulgences to the convict department. The magistrates also kept detailed free and convict population registers based on the musters. One of the first police magistrates in the Richmond Police District was Thomas Lascelles, who was police magistrate for Richmond from 1825. He lived at one stage in the house known as Mayfield. Another early police magistrate was James Gordon, whose name appears on the inscription on Richmond Bridge. Gordon succeeded Lascelles as police magistrate at Richmond in 1830. He applied for a grant in the township of Richmond in Edward Street and stated his intention to build a very good house and make other substantial improvements. Are you all familiar with James Gordon's house? It's the big house before you get to the church. Another police magistrate was the controversial Major Charles Shaw, who was appointed in 1851. He was living at Bellevue, down in Bridge Street in 1853. The courthouse was an intrinsic part of Arthur's system of police districts. It was erected in 1825, probably to the plans of David Lamb. The ceiling is elliptical and it's the only one of its kind in Tasmania. As well as being a courthouse, it was an important meeting place for the embryonic Richmond community. Divine service was regularly conducted there. The original magistrates' bench is still in place. In the 1970s, the building was still being used for its original purpose. In 1978, it was taken over by the state government. Periodically, conservation work is done on the building. When I was living in Richmond, I found a convict pass for Richard Mills in a green garbage bag in one of the rooms of the courthouse. Goodness knows what else. And the pass is now held in the Tasmanian Archives office. It's really hard to read, but it's just basically saying he's got permission to move around. Behind the courthouse were the police buildings, the watch house where convicts were kept temporarily, the police office and constable's barracks. The watch house is thought to have been constructed about 1838 and was enlarged by Henry Buscombe in 1844. The area behind the courthouse was known as the police paddock. At one time, about 1828, it had accommodation for constables as well as stables for their horses. The military barracks designed by John Lee Archer were next door to the jail, but they've been demolished. And it's thought that the back room and stables at Sadler's Court, which is now something else entirely, which predate the main Georgian building, were the magazine and guardhouse of the police paddock. There were also watch houses on private land. They were temporary holding places for convicts who were charged with misdemeanours. Oh, these photos I've pinched from the internet. Don't tell anyone. The northern section of the jail was built in 1825, and everyone wants me to tell you that's 5 years before the establishment of Port Arthur. The oldest part of the jail was used as wardrooms, particularly for convict chain gangs working in the area. John Lee Archer designed the square, adding cell blocks, a kitchen wing and residence in 1832. The building was completed in 1834 and walled in 1839. Plomley, in Friendly Mission, documents the holding of Aborigines at the jail in 1829 during the Black War. They included Umara, chief of the Stony Creek tribe. The jail frequently housed prisoners in transit as well as convict road gangs working in the district. The jail passed to the control of the municipal police when Richmond became a municipality in 1861. In 1873, the Richmond Council sold a large portion of the stone from the jail to the Congregational Church to build the new Congregational Chapel, which is in Bridge Street. In 1927, a new police dwelling was built at Richmond and the jail closed as a police lockup in 1928. It was then returned to the state government and became a state reserve and tourist asset. In 1987, it was private. Why wasn't the lid on it, Dianne? No, good job. Not really, that was the aim. Okay. So, attached to the jail were the jailers, who included W.J. Speed, a former schoolmaster, the first jailer at Richmond, and who remained there until 1830. Ralph Dodsworth, formerly an overseer of convicts on Maria Island, who was there until 1833. Randall Young, who'd served as a policeman in Richmond and was jailer from 1835 to 1842. There were frequent complaints against the jailers and they were often embroiled in controversy. Javelin men were historically spear-carrying court attendants. In Van Diemen's Land, however, they were officially described as prisoners of the Crown with indulgence. They received a small salary from the Sheriff's Department and were used as turnkeys, guards, prisoner escorts, guards at public hangings and messengers. Many were old and infirm, and we're lucky to have a photo of Jabez Brown, who was one of the javelin men at the jail. Flagellators, who were responsible for flogging, were despised and were invariably convicts. They were paid on a daily basis. Flagellators at Richmond included James Carney, William Allenby, William Chambers, George Grover, who you may know of because he was the one that was murdered down at the bridge, Joseph Lawrence, Ike Solomons from Dickens, Fagin from Dickens, Benjamin Underwood and William Geach. Jabez Brown was transported for life in 1840 following several convictions for felony and assault. He served part of his sentence at Bridgewater and Jerusalem before becoming a constable at Richmond and javelin man at Richmond Jail in 1848. In 1858, he had a cottage and land in Jerusalem Street, Richmond. I assume that's... Yeah. And next to him is Solomon Blay, who was the longest serving executioner that we had. Brian Rosette has written a book about Solomon Blay, and Solomon was there, I haven't got the dates, but he was there for a very long time. No. There's other Blays, but Solomon Blay married an arsonist, Mary Murphy, in Oatlands, but he was based here and he did the executions in town and at Oatlands as well. I'm pretty sure he's not, but I can check for you. Roger Gavin was Chief Constable of the Coal River as early as 1818. In the 1830s, he lived at Emerald Cottage in Torrens Street. Do you all know that house? Next to the Congregational Cemetery. So, this was the muster ground, later known as the Municipal Park, currently known as the Village Green. The Richmond Bicentennial Convict Muster will run over 3 days, the 10th to the 12th of February 2024. So that's the Regatta Day long weekend. It will have several convict-related exhibits, including copies of archival convict records. One of these exhibits will focus on the 10 female convicts who were at Richmond and who arrived on the last female convict ship, the Duchess of Northumberland. Preliminary work for the Convict Muster weekend has included the compilation of all convicts known to have been in the Richmond Police District. So there's 2,000 to 3,000 of them. These include one of the toll puddle martyrs, George Lovelace, who lived in a cottage on Glen Eyre, and 2 of the Irish exiles, William Smith O'Brien and Thomas Francis Marr, who also had Richmond connections. You've got that? Yeah. There will be presentations on local Richmond convicts, including Lazarus Howlett and Sarah Copley, who married in St Luke's, Richmond in 1837, and the Norfolk Islanders who settled in the Coal River Valley. Belbin Rivulet is named after one of them. Are there any people here who are descended from the Norfolk Islanders that live in the valley? That little man again, he's the ubiquitous Noel Franco. The Female Convicts Research Centre and the Friends of the Orphan Schools will demonstrate their databases. The Tasmanian Family History Society, the Tasmanian Archives, the Port Arthur Historical Site Management Authority, which includes the Cascades Female Factory, and the Convicts Women's Press are just some of the groups who have expressed an interest in attending. As well as the formal presentations, there will be musical and dramatic performances, cemetery tours highlighting the burials of Richmond convicts, and town tours showing places of convict significance. So if you have a Richmond convict ancestor, and I can see that many of you here tonight do, and would like to register for the event, please contact me. I've left some cards with my email address on the front table. And that's me done for now.